Previously on Stay in Your Lane.
Very common sense approach. Try it out. And I think this is where we are getting smarter and smarter in logistics. 10 years ago, log tech didn't really exist. Like, you had technology companies, but it wasn't SaaS. You didn't have these microservices or startups constantly evolving. And so I do think our industry has evolved to at least be wise enough to say, hey, based on what I read on the website, maybe I should think about how it correlates to me versus what these other companies are marketing.
Andy, anything you want to let the viewers know before we close this episode?
Well, I just want to add, just to Glenn's point, the advances in technology is that the most recent kind of trend that's here to stay, I think, is kind of what he hit on, is that you used to buy technology in like a monolith, right? You'd have to get everything in there. But now a lot of the technology, whether it's an AI service or parts of a TMS or a rating engine, they're starting to be broken out into individual services that can be kind of put together in service of what you, the consumer, want. So AI is just going to be one of those services. That's not a prediction. That's how AI is going to be used. Is it's going to be sit on top of a TMS or sit on top of a service, and it's going to be fed information through a transaction layer that produces an output that is actionable. You could ask it a question of like, find me capacity in the North Maryland DAT market that I can start calling, right? That gets you to the 70%. It's not going to call on that capacity. It's not going to be that relationship. It's not going to replace you, John, right? You think you're a dinosaur, but
now, wait, being me ain't easy. I've said this 1,000 times.
But this is the compliment, right? If just getting started is the hardest thing to do, right? We don't enjoy talking to like automated services when we book an airplane. If you're trusting somebody with your like Q4 on the back of a trailer, you don't want to talk to a chatbot, John. Like, you want an actual phone call, and you want to know that person is going to pick up the phone on a Saturday when it didn't make that delivery.
Hey, 30 years ago, travel agents were actually a job.
They're still around. People still have that preference. But this is all to say that, like, it's a kind of a long-winded way of saying that, like, AI is a real thing. Don't look at it as a monolith. Look at it as a component, and look at it as additive to your organization and a place to get started.
We're going to talk about software purchasing. We're going to talk about understanding how to do it successfully. And we've got two bright gentlemen with us today. Andy Tomka from Movement, VP of Product, and Glenn Koepke, who's been in all different types of roles in our industry for the past, I don't know. Glenn, is it 23 years or 30?
23 years.
23 years. So you're 29 again.
Still have a baby face.
That's right. So, I've watched companies, a lot of my clients over the years buy software. Some of them do extremely well with it and implement it, and it goes very seamless and it is brings a value. I've also watched them buy software and leave it sit on the sideline. I have one client that's had a TMS system for over 11 years now, and they've paid for it, and they're afraid to implement it because they are scared they're going to shut their systems down. To me, that sounds crazy. Then I have some that buy the software and just, don't utilize it and get the value out of it, and then they complain. So, Glenn, how do we understand build versus the buy on software, or how to use it and get the buy-in and get that value out of it when you do buy it?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit more from call it a vendor perspective. So inward out, right? And if you're a car guy, which John, I know you are, I dabble every now and then. So if you associate it to buying a car, right, or just even anyone that is looking at cars, you've got someone that's just driving down the road, right? They don't really care. All of a sudden, they just see something really cool, piques their interest. You got someone that's the window shopper that's just wants to scan what's out there. They may kind of have a general idea. They may know that, hey, in 6 months I need something. So they're just going to go window shop. You got the tire kicker that knows what they need, but there's this like constant just anxiety. Am I doing the right things? I got to check all the stuff, make sure that, it's got the right packages, all that. And then you got kind of the financer, or the call it the exec sponsor, that's going to pay for it. They may or may not care about warranty and all the other packages. They may just cut the check and leave, or they may put you through their meat grinder because their butt's on the line with the money that they're spending on this car. And so, if you break down those four typical types of buyers, it translates well into the software market or service market. And I think even from a broker perspective, you see this quite frequently as well. The way if I were to simplify it even further from a buyer, it's like, do I have a vision for what I need or do I not? And so when you think of like build versus buy, even if you're building, you still need to have a vision, right? If you're going to buy, you better have a vision. Otherwise, you're going to buy something. And John, to your point, they're going to sit on it for 10 years, right? It was probably someone else's decision. They weren't really bought in. They made a decision. They didn't lose their job over it.
Car sits over there. It's got a dead battery.
Bingo. So I've driven by plenty of yards that's got, an army of vehicles in there that are sitting there. So, I think for the listeners and the audience members is really think about, do I have a vision for what I need or do I not? And it's okay if you don't, right? When you think of individuals like myself or Andy, many companies offer these solution-oriented individuals that can help prescribe what's going on. You may use a consultant, you may do it yourself, you may formulate opinions from other folks, that's totally fine. But ultimately, you've got to figure out, why would I do this? Why now? What's the impact on my org? And are we ready for it? So, I think, Andy, I'll let you maybe kick off some of the build versus buy conversations. But in terms of like the tire kickers versus what's out there, really think about that vision and where you're at. And it's okay to rely on others for help.
Yeah, and before I kind of get into the build versus buy, I would also just kind of add to that, within the four walls of your company, right? Identify who your champions are going to be for maybe that tech adoption, and maybe just who's kind of on the fence with that, because those champions are going to be critical people to kind of lead you into whatever that opportunity is. And the people that are a little bit on the fence, they're also a good additive to your organization. Those people that are a little suspect, or they're really good at their job and learning something new is a challenge to them. That can make implementation of this software very difficult without the buy-in of those people. But also those people can be kind of a little bit of a canary in the coal mine. So listening to those maybe internal difficult to work with kind of people in that migration is but communicating that this is something that strategically the company has to do, but don't change, still call it out when you see it, because we do want this to go really well. So having a good balance within your organization, I think is a net benefit to the outcome. When it comes to the build versus buy question, right? I've had conversations with small companies. I've had conversations with large companies. Really, what you should understand is that it has gotten a lot cheaper to build software or to create it. But the technology that you want to adopt into that has become kind of spread out and thinned out. So when it comes to like a build versus buy calculation, my advice to smaller operators is that there's a lot of great technology out there. Just get to a size where you're so big that you have custom processes or custom situations with specific lines of business where building something is an advantage to you. But until you get to that point, I think it's buy right now. The number in my mind is around 125 in gross revenue. Anything under that is like just find something that works for your company and implements really well into the business you run.
Well, you bring up a lot of good points, Glenn. You're great. I can't say enough how much I enjoy your participation. Andy, you bring up some valid, huge perspectives. I'm going to say that you have to identify people of influence in an organization. And the people that are of influence over the majority of the people in the organization may not be the driving force in the software or the value for the company to get from the software. So you guys have both been on software and involved in software and involved in transitions and migrations, and it's much easier when you have people in an organization that are of influence upon the other people in the organization. When you have their adoption, then I think you can you somewhat get fast tracked on the adoption and the value. That becomes a much easier sell to the employees that are going to be adopting and using it. If you don't have the people of influence in the organization or don't recognize who they are, then it can be very difficult, and it can spiral and go all different types of directions, because it's sometimes the people of influence aren't necessarily the decision makers buying the software. To your point, Glenn.
The challenge I see a little bit is you can enter this political game pretty quickly, right? I can't tell you how many projects, whether former company or working with customers, where even in a traditional build versus buy scenario, there's so much bias and politicizing of what's going on, and it becomes a us versus them, which is a very dangerous approach. And so I think as folks go through build versus buy, you really have to take the emotion and the bias out of it, which is really, really hard, right? Because if I go in saying, hey, I know we need to build this, but I'm just going to go entertain the market, and then every exec I talk to, I'm going to poison the well, that is a lot of bias to overcome. And candidly, I can't tell you how many projects, whether it's shipper or 3PL, that over the last 15 years, I was told that, hey, we're going to go build this monster thing. And you fast forward and maybe 10% were successful. And, Andy, I think you've used a term in previous conversations where it's, technology isn't this monolithic beast anymore. But when you look at, if you're a 3PL or if you're a shipper, we often look at the soup to nuts process, right? It's like, well, I don't want to just go buy a freight audit solution and then go buy a routing guide solution. So it's like, well, I'm going to go build the entire kit and caboodle. You're at 5 years before anyone's ever going to be touched. And so I think a couple of pieces of advice from my end is be as unbiased as possible, which is really, really hard, is number one. Number two is look at really what's out there in the market, and then think of your end customer and your end employee. When you build custom software, it is a heck of a lot harder to go find that skill set in the open market, right? And then three, you got to look at just overall time to value, right? If you take 5 years or 2 years building to what is current state, you've already lost 2 years in that time you're building it.
Continue watching on the next episode of the Stay in Your Lane podcast.